I spent 30 years in journalism before I ended up behind this microphone, and in that time, I learned exactly one thing about the truth. It doesn't care about you. The truth doesn't arrive when you're ready for it. It doesn't wear the face you expected, and it sure as hell doesn't show up on the side you were rooting for. I thought about that today when I read about a custody hearing in Fort Worth, Texas, a case where both parents loved their child, where one parent had proof, real, verifiable, technically flawless proof of something that never happened, and a judge who'd spent 30 years trusting her own eyes had to decide what evidence means when seeing is no longer believing. My name is Margot Calloway, and you're listening to Signals. Tonight's transmission comes from a courtroom in Tarrant County, where the future of truth is being decided by people who still remember what it used to mean. Sleep well. And if you can't, well, that's what I'm here for. The courthouse smelled like old wood and recycled air and the particular anxiety of people who had dressed in clothes they didn't normally wear. Lena Park noticed this every time she entered a courtroom. The stiff collars, the new shoes that squeaked on marble, the way everyone walked a little more carefully, as though the building itself might judge them for slouching. The Tarrant County Family Court building on Weatherford Street was 140 years old in its bones, renovated twice, still leaking from the same corner of the third-floor ceiling it had been leaking from since 2019. Lena had been in courtrooms before, but always as a regulator, filing reports, presenting findings, sitting in the gallery while lawyers argued about things she'd spent months investigating. She'd never been called as an expert witness. 6 months ago, she wouldn't have been qualified, but 6 months ago, the Bureau of Algorithmic Accountability hadn't yet created its Evidentiary Integrity Division, and Lena hadn't yet become, by accident and necessity, one of 11 people in the country certified to assess AI-generated evidence in family court proceedings. 11 people, for a country with 3,000 family courts. The math was a horror story she tried not to think about. She sat on a bench outside courtroom 3B, reviewing her notes on a tablet. The hallway was fluorescent lit and crowded, lawyers conferring in low voices, a man in a bolo tie pacing near the water fountain, a woman sitting alone on the opposite bench with her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. That would be Rachel Garza, the respondent, the mother, the woman whose ex-husband had submitted 4 videos to the court showing her screaming at their 8-year-old son, throwing a plate against a kitchen wall and, in the most damaging clip, grabbing the boy by the arm hard enough to leave marks that were visible on camera. None of it had happened. All of it was true. Lena had reviewed the videos 46 times. She'd run them through the Bureau's forensic analysis suite, a system called Veritas that could detect deepfakes with 97% accuracy by analyzing pixel-level inconsistencies, audio spectral artifacts, and temporal coherence failures. The kind of flaws that the human eye couldn't see, but that the math couldn't hide. Veritas had flagged all 4 videos as synthetic, generated, fabricated. But Veritas had also flagged something else, something that made Lena's stomach turn in a way that 46 viewings hadn't managed. The videos weren't random fabrications. They were modeled on real behavioral data, text messages, audio recordings, testimony from witnesses, school counselor reports, therapy session notes that had been subpoenaed earlier in the case. The AI system that generated them had been fed every piece of evidence in the existing record and asked, essentially, to visualize it, to take the words and the data and the patterns and render them into something you could see. The videos showed things that had never happened, but they depicted a pattern that, according to the existing evidence, was real. Rachel Garza had a temper. Multiple witnesses had confirmed it. Her own therapist's notes, redacted but present in the record, described episodes of emotional dysregulation. The school counselor had documented 2 instances where the boy, Miguel, had come to school describing arguments at home. Rachel herself, in a deposition, had admitted to raising her voice more than she should, and to having bad days. The AI had taken all of that and built specific scenes. A Tuesday evening in the kitchen, a Saturday morning argument about homework, a confrontation in the hallway that ended with a slammed door. They were fictional in their specifics and accurate in their essence, and Lena had spent 2 weeks trying to find a word for that. The closest she'd gotten was honest lies, evidence that told the truth about a person by inventing things they'd never done. The petitioner, Daniel Garza, the father, had submitted them through his attorney with a cover letter from the AI company that generated them. The company was called TrueFrame, and their tagline was, "Evidence you can see." Their legal disclaimer was 4 pages long and included the phrase, "behavioral synthesis based on verified source material." They were, as far as Lena could determine, not breaking any existing law. Texas had passed its deepfake disclosure statute in 2035, requiring synthetic media to be labeled as such. TrueFrame had labeled the videos. They'd disclosed their methodology. They'd even included confidence intervals. It was all legal. It was all disclosed. And it was the most dangerous thing Lena had ever seen in a courtroom. Judge Eleanor Voss entered through the side door at exactly 9 o'clock, because Eleanor Voss had entered every courtroom at exactly 9 o'clock for 30 years, and she was not going to let the collapse of epistemological certainty interfere with punctuality. Lena watched her from the witness stand. Voss was 67, tall, with white hair pulled back in a style that hadn't changed since her first year on the bench. She wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck and carried a legal pad, yellow, college-ruled, the kind they sold at the drugstore for $3. Lena had heard stories about Voss. Everyone in Texas family law had. She printed every filing on paper. She read every page. She'd once held a lawyer in contempt for submitting a brief with chatbot-generated case citations that turned out to be hallucinated, cases that didn't exist, from courts that had never convened. That was in 2034. Since then, every attorney who appeared before Voss knew to triple-check their sources. Voss sat down. She looked at the courtroom the way a captain looks at a ship, assessing structural integrity before setting sail. "We're here on the matter of Garza versus Garza, case number 360469401-09. Her voice was low, clear, and carried the particular Texas diction that turned 3 syllables into 2 without losing any precision. "I've reviewed the filings, I've reviewed the exhibits, and I've asked Ms. Park from the Bureau of Algorithmic Accountability to assist the court in evaluating petitioner's exhibits 7 through 10. Ms. Park, you've been sworn. Let's begin." Daniel Garza's attorney, a man named Keith Whitfield, well-dressed, early 40s, the kind of lawyer who made eye contact with the judge like he was sharing a confidence, stood first. "Your Honor, the petitioner has submitted 4 video exhibits generated by TrueFrame's behavioral synthesis platform. These exhibits are clearly labeled as AI-generated content, in full compliance with Texas Civil Practice and Remedies Code Section 1807. They are offered not as recordings of actual events, but as visual representations of documented behavioral patterns, patterns supported by witness testimony, therapeutic records, and the respondent's own admissions." Voss looked at him over her reading glasses. "Mr. Whitfield," in plain English. "They're videos that show what the evidence says was happening in that home, Your Honor. Not recordings, reconstructions." "Reconstructions based on what, exactly?" "On the full evidentiary record. Text messages, therapy notes, school reports, deposition testimony. TrueFrame's system ingests the source material and generates—" "I know what it generates. I've watched them." Voss set down her pen. "I watched them 3 times, and I'll tell you, Mr. Whitfield, they're convincing. They're very convincing. That's what concerns me. Ms. Park?" Lena adjusted the microphone. She'd rehearsed this in her hotel room the night before, speaking to the mirror until she was satisfied that she could explain computational epistemology to a courtroom without sounding like she was giving a lecture. "Your Honor, I was retained to assess the authenticity and evidentiary reliability of Exhibits 7 through 10. My analysis confirms that all 4 videos are AI-generated synthetic media. They were not recorded by any camera. The people depicted in them are digital constructions. Their faces, voices, movements, and environments were generated by TrueFrame's proprietary model. And this model, how does it work? Voss asked. In simplified terms, the system ingests a dataset, in this case, the existing evidentiary record, and generates visual scenarios that are statistically consistent with the patterns in that data. If the data suggests that a person raises their voice during arguments about homework, the system will generate a scene depicting that person raising their voice during an argument about homework. Specific details, the time of day, the room, the exact words spoken, are invented by the model, but the behavioral pattern is derived from real evidence. Voss leaned forward. So the videos show things that didn't happen. Yes, Your Honor, but they show things that are consistent with things that did happen. Yes, that's the core problem. Voss took off her glasses. She rubbed the bridge of her nose with 2 fingers, a gesture so private that Lena felt she shouldn't be watching it. When Voss put her glasses back on, something in her expression had shifted. Not confusion. Something closer to the look of a person who has just realized that the ground under their feet is not as solid as they thought. Ms. Park, I've been on this bench for 30 years. I've evaluated thousands of pieces of evidence, photographs, recordings, financial records, text messages, testimony under oath, and in every case, the question I ask is the same. Does this evidence accurately represent something that actually occurred? That's the standard. That's what evidence is, something that corresponds to a real event in the real world. She paused. What do I do with evidence that corresponds to a real pattern, but not a real event? The courtroom was quiet. Rachel Garza's attorney, a woman named Priya Anand, younger, intense, the kind of lawyer who sat very still when she was furious, had her pen hovering over her legal pad, not writing. Lena took a breath. Your Honor, the traditional framework distinguishes between authentic evidence and fabricated evidence. Authentic evidence is real, fabricated evidence is fake, but TrueFrame's product exists in a category that this framework doesn't account for. The videos are fabricated. They depict events that never occurred, but they're derived from authentic source material, and the behavioral patterns they depict are supported by that material. They're simultaneously dishonest and accurate. How can something be dishonest and accurate? Because accuracy and honesty aren't the same thing. Lena heard herself saying words she'd been turning over for weeks, and for the first time they felt sharp enough. Accuracy means the content corresponds to real patterns. Honesty means the content represents what actually happened. These videos are accurate in the way that a weather forecast is accurate. They predict behavior based on data, but they're dishonest in the way that a lie is dishonest. They present fabricated events as though they occurred. The fact that similar events probably did occur doesn't make the fabricated versions honest. It makes them more dangerous. More dangerous, Voss repeated, because they're harder to disbelieve. A crude deepfake, a poorly made fake video, is easy to dismiss. The face doesn't look right, the voice is off, the lighting is wrong. But TrueFrame's videos are technically flawless, and because they're built on real behavioral data, they feel true to anyone who's read the other evidence. They confirm what people already suspect, and confirmation is the most persuasive force in any courtroom. The morning session broke at 11:30. Lena walked to the hallway and found a corner near a window where the November sunlight came in weak and gray. Fort Worth in November. The sky the color of a wool blanket. The kind of cold that wasn't dramatic but persistent. The kind that got into your joints. She checked her phone. A text from David. June wants to know if you're coming to her school play Friday. A text from her colleague at the bureau. How's the testimony going? Everyone here is watching. A notification from her apartment's smart thermostat. Energy saving mode activated. Indoor temp 64F. She didn't answer any of them. She was thinking about Rachel Garza. She'd read the full record. Rachel was 34, a dental hygienist, born in Arlington, raised by a single mother. She coached Miguel's soccer team on Saturdays. She'd started therapy after the separation, voluntarily, because she knew she had a temper and she wanted to be better. Her therapist's notes described a woman working hard, genuinely, measurably hard, to manage anger that had roots in a childhood she hadn't asked for. The videos didn't show any of that. They couldn't. TrueFrame's system had been fed evidence of the bad days, the raised voices, the moments when Rachel's control slipped. It hadn't been fed the 95% of the time when she was patient, kind, present. It hadn't been fed the soccer practices or the bedtime stories or the way she drove 40 minutes each way to take Miguel to a speech therapist in Arlington because the wait list in Fort Worth was 8 months long. The AI had been given a data set that was true but incomplete, and it had generated a portrait that was accurate but devastating. And the person who'd commissioned it, Daniel Garza, wasn't a monster. He was a frightened father who believed his son was in danger, and he'd found a tool that could show the court what he'd been trying to tell them for 2 years. That was the part that kept Lena staring out the window. Daniel Garza wasn't lying. He believed every word. The AI wasn't lying. It had been transparent about its methods. TrueFrame wasn't lying. They'd disclosed everything. Rachel Garza wasn't lying when she admitted to having bad days. Nobody in this courtroom was lying, and the evidence was still dishonest, and Lena couldn't figure out who to be angry at because the answer might be no one, or the answer might be everyone, or the answer might be that anger was the wrong response entirely, and what she should be feeling was the vertigo of standing in a world where the old categories, true and false, real and fake, honest and dishonest, had been replaced by something murkier, something that required new words she hadn't invented yet. The afternoon session was worse. Whitfield, Daniel's attorney, called a TrueFrame representative, a polished woman named Stephanie Chen, who had the unflappable calm of someone who'd testified before and knew exactly where the lines were. Ms. Chen, can you explain to the court how TrueFrame ensures the accuracy of its behavioral synthesis? Certainly. Our system uses a multi-source verification model. Every generated scenario is cross-referenced against at least 3 independent data points in the source material. We don't generate content that contradicts the evidence. We generate content that is consistent with it. Our accuracy rate, as independently audited, is 91% alignment with source behavioral patterns. Priya Anand, Rachel's attorney, stood for cross-examination. Her voice was controlled in a way that suggested significant effort. Ms. Chen, your system generates videos of events that never happened. Is that correct? Our system generates visual representations of documented behavioral patterns. That's not what I asked. The specific events shown in the videos, did they happen? The specific depicted scenarios are synthesized. The behavioral patterns they depict are documented. So the events didn't happen. The specific scenarios are, Ms. Chen, did a woman named Rachel Garza throw a plate against a kitchen wall at 7:43 p.m. on a Tuesday in September? Yes or no? A pause. No. That specific event is a synthesized scenario. Did Rachel Garza grab her son's arm hard enough to leave visible marks on the morning of October 14th? That specific event is, did it happen, Ms. Chen? No. Thank you. Nothing further. But the damage, Lena knew, was done. The videos had been seen. The judge had watched them 3 times. Priya Anand could establish that the events were fictional, but she couldn't unshow them. She couldn't reach into Judge Voss's mind and remove the image of Rachel Garza's face contorted in rage, even if that face was a digital construction and that rage was an algorithmic inference. The brain doesn't store information with source tags. It doesn't file memories under real and synthetic. It just remembers what it saw. Voss called Lena back to the stand at 2:15. Ms. Park, I want to understand something. You said this morning that these videos are simultaneously dishonest and accurate. I've been sitting with that through lunch, and I have to confess it's given me indigestion. A few people in the gallery exhaled, not quite laughs, but close. I've spent my career asking one question about evidence. Is it reliable? Can I trust it to tell me what happened? And now you're telling me there's a category of evidence that is reliable about patterns, but unreliable about events. That it can tell me what kind of thing happened without telling me what actually happened. That's correct, Your Honor. Then let me ask you the question I've been chewing on since this morning. Should I allow it? Lena felt the weight of the courtroom. Rachel Garza, motionless at the respondent's table. Daniel Garza, leaning forward slightly at the petitioner's table, his hand on the arm of his chair. Whitfield, pen still. Anand, watching Lena with an expression that was either hope or dread. The court reporter, fingers poised. And Voss, looking at Lena with the frank expectation of a person who has asked a hard question and expects a hard answer. Your Honor, that's ultimately a legal determination, not a technical one. But I can tell you what I believe. I believe that evidence should correspond to events, not to predictions. The moment we allow evidence that shows what probably happened instead of what did happen, we've changed the definition of proof. And in a family court case, where the stakes are a child's life, that change terrifies me. Voss was quiet. She looked down at her legal pad. Lena could see, from the angle of the witness stand, that the pad was covered in handwriting. Not the shorthand notes of a judge listening passively, but the dense, looping script of someone thinking through a problem in real time. Mr. Whitfield, Voss said finally, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want a straight answer. Of course, Your Honor. Who hired TrueFrame? My client retained their services as part of... I didn't ask who retained them. I asked who hired them, who made the phone call, who signed the engagement letter, who gave them the data. Whitfield glanced at Daniel Garza. My client directly engaged TrueFrame's services. Your client, the father. Yes, Your Honor. The father who is seeking primary custody of his son. The father who believes, and I'm not saying he's wrong to believe this, that his son is in an unsafe environment. The father who is, by every measure I've seen in this courtroom, a good man who loves his child. Yes, Your Honor. Voss took off her glasses again. She set them on the bench. Without them, her face looked older, more exposed, and for the first time, Lena saw something in the judge's expression that she recognized. It was the look of someone watching a tool they'd trusted their whole life. Their judgment, their instinct, their ability to weigh evidence and find the truth inside it, become insufficient. Here's what troubles me, Mr. Whitfield. The good parent hired the AI, not the bad parent, not some third party trying to manipulate the court. The parent that everyone in this courtroom, including, if I'm being honest, this judge, is inclined to believe. And that parent used a tool that fabricates evidence, convincing evidence, technically flawless evidence, evidence that this court cannot unsee. She paused. If the bad parent had submitted this evidence, I'd strike it in a heartbeat. Fabricated evidence is fabricated evidence, but the good parent submitted it. And the good parent submitted it because he believes it's true, not factually true, but essentially true. He believes his son is in danger, and he found a machine that could show me what that danger looks like. Voss picked up her legal pad. She looked at her notes. She set it down again. Ms. Park, you told me that truth isn't the same as fact. I've been thinking about that, and you're right, it isn't. Mothers who raise their voices aren't the same as mothers who throw plates. Patterns aren't the same as incidents. And evidence that something could have happened isn't the same as evidence that it did. She turned to the courtroom. I'm striking Exhibits 7 through 10. They will not be considered in this court's custody determination. Whitfield stood. Your Honor. I'm not finished, Mr. Whitfield. Voss's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I'm also ordering that any future submission of AI-generated behavioral synthesis in this court will require prior approval under a framework that doesn't exist yet, because no one in the state of Texas has written it, and I'm referring this matter to the Judicial Committee on Technology and Family Proceedings with a recommendation that they draft standards before the next case like this arrives, which, based on my experience, will be about 3 weeks from now. She looked at Daniel Garza. Her expression was not unkind. Mr. Garza, I believe you love your son. I believe you are genuinely concerned about his welfare. I believe you hired TrueFrame because you were desperate and because you thought the truth needed help being seen. But the truth doesn't need help, sir. The truth needs to be found, not manufactured, even when finding it is harder, even when the manufactured version is more convincing, especially then. She looked at Rachel Garza. Ms. Garza, the striking of this evidence does not constitute a finding regarding the other evidence in this case. Your conduct will be evaluated on the record as it exists, testimony, documents, and verified materials. You are not exonerated by this ruling. You are given the basic dignity of being judged for what you've done, not for what a machine predicted you might do. She picked up her gavel. She didn't use it. We're adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow. Ms. Park, thank you for your assistance. You're excused. Lena found Judge Voss in the hallway afterward, which she hadn't planned and probably shouldn't have done. Voss was standing near the same window where Lena had stood that morning, looking out at the same gray sky, holding a paper cup of coffee from the courthouse vending machine. Judge Voss, I just wanted to... You did well in there, Ms. Park. Clear, honest, useful. 3 things that are increasingly hard to find in a courtroom. Thank you. I wanted to ask, off the record, if that's possible. Voss looked at her. Her eyes were sharp and tired simultaneously, the way eyes get after decades of looking at things they wish they hadn't seen. I'm not sure anything is off the record anymore, but go ahead. Did you know, before I testified, did you already know you were going to strike the evidence? Voss sipped her coffee. It was clearly terrible. She drank it anyway. I knew the first time I watched those videos. They were too real. That's what gave them away. Not technically. I couldn't have told you they were synthetic. But emotionally, they were too perfectly what you'd expect to see. Real life isn't that coherent. Real abuse isn't that photogenic. It's messier, uglier, more boring than what those videos showed. The videos looked like abuse as imagined by someone who'd read about abuse, not abuse as lived by someone going through it. She set the coffee cup on the windowsill. I've seen real evidence of real abuse in my courtroom, Ms. Park, thousands of times, and it never looks like that. It looks like a child who won't make eye contact. It looks like a bruise in a place a child can't explain. It looks like a mother who says everything is fine in a voice that sounds like glass. It doesn't look like a movie. The machine made it look like a movie because that's what machines think convincing looks like. And that's how I knew. She picked up her coffee again. She turned to leave. Judge Voss? Yes? What happens when the machines get better? When they stop making it look like a movie? When it looks exactly like real life? Voss didn't answer immediately. She stood in the hallway of the courthouse she'd worked in for 3 decades, in a building that was 140 years old, holding a cup of bad coffee, and for a moment, she looked exactly like what she was. A woman at the end of an era, standing in the rubble of a framework she'd spent her life building, watching it become insufficient in real time. Then God help us, Ms. Park, because I won't be able to. She walked away. Her shoes clicked on the marble. The sound echoed off walls that had heard a century of arguments about what was true and what wasn't, and the walls didn't care, because walls never do, and the truth, whatever that word meant now, kept on being whatever it was, indifferent to the people trying to find it, unchanged by the machines trying to build it, as quiet and stubborn and unhelpful as it had always been. Lena stood at the window. The sky over Fort Worth was darkening. Somewhere in this city, Rachel Garza was going home to an apartment where she'd have a bad day or a good day, and no one would film either one, and that was the most basic form of dignity there was. The right to be unseen in your worst moments, the right to be imperfect without a machine turning your imperfections into evidence. Somewhere else, Daniel Garza was going home to an apartment where he'd call his son and hear Miguel's voice and wonder if he'd done the right thing, and the answer was yes and no, and both at once, because he'd been telling the truth and fabricating the evidence, and those two things weren't supposed to be compatible. But here they were, in the same case, in the same courtroom, in the same century that had promised to make everything clearer and had instead made clarity itself obsolete. Lena drove to the airport. She called June from the rental car. "Hey, Bug, I'll be at your play Friday, I promise." "Mommy, can I show you the dance I learned? It's for the play." "Show me when I get home. I want to show you now." "You can't show me a dance on the phone, baby." "Yes, I can. Watch." Lena heard rustling, footsteps, the particular chaos of a 6-year-old performing for an audience of one. She couldn't see anything. She could hear everything. The shuffle of bare feet on hardwood, a giggle, a stumble, a recovery. The sound of a child being alive in a way that no algorithm could synthesize and no video could capture and no court could evaluate, because it wasn't evidence of anything. It was just real. Messy, incoherent, unphotogenic, and real. "Did you see it, Mommy?" "I saw it, baby. It was perfect." Here's what nobody tells you about evidence. The word comes from the Latin evidentia, meaning obvious to the eye. That's all it ever meant. Something you could see, something you could point to, something so plain that it didn't need interpretation. We built machines that can show us anything, and now nothing is obvious anymore. I keep thinking about Judge Voss, standing in that hallway with her bad coffee, saying, "God help us." Not because she didn't have the answer, but because she'd spent 30 years believing the answer existed, that if you looked hard enough, long enough, carefully enough, you could find the truth. And now she's standing in a world where the truth can be generated, where facts can be synthesized, where the most convincing evidence in the room is the evidence that never happened. And she's not wrong, and she's not helpless. She struck those videos. She used the only tool she had left: judgment, human judgment. The thing we keep being told is obsolete. Maybe it is, but it's all we've got tonight. This has been Signals. I'm Margot Calloway, broadcasting from Marfa, Texas, where the courthouse is closed and the stars are still inadmissible and the truth is out there somewhere, doing whatever the truth does when no one's watching. Sleep well, and if you can't, well, that's what I'm here for. If you'd like to receive the next transmission, subscribe. New signals arrive weekly, and tell a friend who can't sleep. We'll leave the light on. If you'd like to receive the next transmission, subscribe. New signals arrive weekly, and tell a friend who can't sleep. We'll leave the light on.